Same face.
I have some questions, but I'm not sure. I don't know that mine should take priority. I mean, my big question, which I think I should know by this time, but I still don't get it, is what the hell is desire in this book? And one reason I wanted Chase to be here, I mean, maybe somebody here knows something about Freud or Lacan, but on page 291 at the very top, he says, we use the term libido to designate the specific energy of desiring machines. And then he's got these other two forms of it. But then, on the next page, top of 292, we admit that any comparison of sexuality with cosmic phenomena, and then a whole bunch of other stuff, in the end appears to us more adequate than the reduction of sexuality to the pitiful little familial secret. So I don't understand. I mean, again, I feel like I ought to by this point, but I don't understand what libido is outside of what outside the bounds of sexual desire. I mean, it is. I mean, the odd thing is he says it is sexual desire, but they're applying libido and desire in general, as far as I can tell, to everything. Like it is the underlying force. Like he talked, like it says the cosmic phenomena, and machines are not merely biological machines; they're mechanical machines as well, and yet they are composed. They are aggregates of desiring machines, which means desire is involved there. So I just don't understand what he means by desire, what they mean, why they use the word desire, why do they use the word libido to describe, this underlying, everything in the world is about sex. But it's, the thing is, it's not merely humans. It's not even merely biology. It's everything, like literally a cosmic force. And they keep saying, we're not using metaphors here. This is not a metaphor. And so I don't, maybe if I understood Freud and or Lacan, I would have a better clue, but I just don't get what the hell's going on there.
It does seem like the picture they paint is that the reason why we have, for example, water molecules is because hydrogen molecules like to have threesomes with two oxygen. Sorry. Two hydrogen, one oxygen, right? Like chemical bonds are like sexual, it seems.
Yeah, I actually,
Chase,
if you wouldn't mind, I kind of want to attempt to answer it, and then if I totally botch it, you can just be like, dude, hell no, you don't know.
I didn't really have an answer. I just wanted to say, chemical bonds definitely sexual. I have a friend who's a chemist, and she actually described bonds to me in a sexual manner. So yeah.
So I want to say, like, a lot of what these their concepts, they pull from everybody that they've mentioned in some way or another. As far as desire goes, I think it is. I mean, it's definitely complicated, but it's also that simple. Like what Eric just said, like the molecular attraction and repulsion of atoms based on their molecular makeup or subatomic makeup is the same kind of desire, but on a smaller scale, just as like the way the state, well, I guess the state can manipulate people into desiring whatever it needs to preserve itself. But I think a big connection is like thinking about Freud with the libido and Nietzsche with like the will to power. Like the will to power, I think, is a good example of desire, but I don't think it's like stopped at that. Like, right? Like if the will is like this oligarchy of drives that dominates all of the other drives in a person, I think that would line up pretty well with both of their idea, because they talk a lot about like multiplicities. Like the individual in a way could be looked at as multiplicities. Oh wait, let's see. Right. But like, I think this is going to what Eric put in, like, everything is about sex and sex is about power, right? So like, I think with this idea of sex itself, it could be that they're saying like not just the act of like actual sex, but everything that comes along with that as well. I think somebody has said that. I don't remember where, but again, if I'm wrong, feel free to say. He's not saying that about Nietzsche. Okay. Well, like, what about the will to power, though? Like, would that be a good example of desire manifesting itself in an individual? Like, because in an individual or a state or any of the, whether it be like a molecular or molar aggregate of flows, right? Because I feel like that makes sense. And with like Freud too, he calls it the libido, which is just like life energy. How is calling chemical bonds libido not metaphorical? I think because like in the way, I think when they're saying it's not metaphorical, again, this is just how I understood it. Like, it's the only way we could think about that as far as just things happening, right? That may be a terrible way of describing it, but I think it makes sense. I mean, like, desire, I feel, is just what they put in earlier. It's like either a desire to or desire not to, right? So an attraction or a repulsion. And like whether you call that the attraction of one atom to another, or the attraction of somebody to another person, or people to an object, whatever it may be, I feel like they're trying to make it the same concept, whether it be of repulsion or attraction, right?
Well, for example, magnetic repulsion and attraction has some structural similarities to electrical repulsion, although they're very different too. Electricity there are monopoles, positive charges and negative charges. There's no magnetic monopole. So even those two aren't the same. So you can't, like there's a mathematical relationship between electricity and magnetism, but they're not the same. And so you can't, I don't see how you can reduce magnetic attraction to electrical attraction. And then human attraction to me seems to be very different from either one of those. And so calling them all the same thing to me just sounds arbitrary and anthropomorphic. And they're trying not to be anthropomorphic, I think, because they think that subjectivity is just this kind of weird, this sort of polyp that kind of pops off the side of production. And so they're trying very much, it seems to be, to not be like phenomenologists and so on who begin with subjectivity. They're trying not to do that. But to reduce all things to libidinal forces seems to me very anthropomorphic.
Well, I'm jumping in, like, there isn't also their argument that they don't want to reduce libidinal forces to like human sexuality. So when they're arguing to reduce everything to libido, their idea of libido like isn't human, I guess.
But again, all those different forces are very different from one another. Electricity, magnetism, there's all sorts of physical forces and other things that are not reducible to one another. So even if you just gonna, if you say we're going to reduce all force to libido, I don't see how that. I don't see how that just doesn't generate all kinds of erroneous.
Is it reducing all force to libido? And I'm wondering, like, maybe are they referring to just the way that things interact with one another? Because I'm thinking, like, I don't think they were saying the flower is the wasp, but like how the flower interacts with the wasp. Like how I interact with something that's not human or that's not me. It's not that like I am that, but like how things imitate and interact with one another. And I guess like I didn't see him trying to say that everything's the same, but there's this process of things interacting that is similar across like differences, like, across different entities.
Yeah, that's how I understood attraction and repulsion, right? Like no matter like the makeup, like if you're comparing electrical to magnetic makeup, you can still understand it with attraction and repulsion, with those being the basis or the machinic functions of both of those, right? Although they may be, you know, they may be composed in different ways, which I do not know.
Yeah, I think the idea that it's not like some kind of thing or a substance that everything is in a very blocky way, and then we can just understand everything by calling it this word, libido or sex or whatever. I think it's more kind of the way that Joe was talking about, as you know, how you describe how things interact and change. It's more, this is a process ontology that they're working out. And I think the way that, you know, so for Nietzsche, you know, you got will to power, you got becoming, that is really kind of that's the ground, I guess, of being more so. And the same way, it's so with will to power, if you see it as kind of like this energy of transformation, I think that's what they see libido as. And what they're saying is that it's that energy of transformation and interaction and change and connections within connections within connections, the whole machinic thing. That's really what everything is. And then that's from that, you get, though, these kind of emergent structures of all these other kinds of formations of, still, what are they? Kinds of interaction, kinds of connections. And then, so I think it's more something like that. And then you get a particular type that is what we recognize as human sexuality, but they're not saying that human sexuality, as what we think of as libido, that is everything. They're trying to deterritorialize the word libido and extend it. And they're not trying to just take it in its narrow definition and apply it to everything. It's kind of like, so if I were to say that, just like a panpsychism, I wouldn't, it'd be a very bad panpsychism to say that just consciousness, as exactly as I experience it, that's what everything is conscious, you know, of. That's what all consciousness is like, and then apply that to everything. Instead, it would be thinking that, okay, there's some aspect maybe of my consciousness that is consistent or connects with all the other kinds of consciousness. So it's necessarily an extension of the way that we would normally think of consciousness. So that's why they see it as a kind of non-anthropomorphic thing. And I think the way, yeah, they see it on a molecular level. And they're saying that, yeah, those kind of basic interactions, you know, like molecules, whatever, repulsing each other and these bonds and everything, that all that's not necessarily, they're not saying like they're having sex or whatever. That's to apply obviously anthropomorphic terms to it. Instead, they're saying that, yeah, that kind of, if you think about it in this kind of like subjective abstract essence kind of manner, that's more kind of like, yeah, I can see where just simply the abstract kind of essence of repulsion, attraction, energy, force, things like that is really what's going on. And they're saying that human sexuality is built out of that too. There's no radical separation between the attraction that we feel and the attraction that anything feels, or that what feeling is at all. I think, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I think I follow that about that. But I mean, I guess I feel like, you know, yeah, why use the word libido? Like, why call into question, like, why not just create a new word? And I guess I'm thinking too of like, I mean, people kind of make that argument about why keep using the word God, you know, like arguing, why not just take on a whole different language?
I think when they say libido, the way I understood it was most of like when they critique, well, when they bring up that word, it's in reference to Freud and psychoanalysts that have come before them. And I think they're using that because it's part of the psychoanalysis lexicon. And I think they're kind of trying to take that and I guess with what Chase was saying, like, right, like expand it beyond just what we see it, well, as we understand it anthropomorphically.
Like I said in the chat, I think there's also Charles Fourier's influence. They mention him twice in this. And Charles Fourier has this kind of idea of this, it does seem very similar. It's kind of like a libidinal desire as like this cosmic force that is also in humans. And you can see that throughout all of human society, but also through all nature. And it goes in these different movements. And like I mentioned, and Fourier was also like, I know like there's a lot of interest in him and some of Deleuze's contemporaries at the same time, like Rene Scher and Guy Hokankum, for instance. Hokankum basically calls for like a return to Fourier, and so I think there's a lot of influence from that too.
I think what you're saying, Ripley, reminds me of kind of how, because I was reading them mention Reich, and I feel like someone like Reich, you know, because they're referring to Reich and talking about this, how do they refer it? Some sort of like cosmic, this vague cosmic energy. And the fact that they like, and again, I you know, every time I see Reich's name mentioned, I'm like trying to understand how do they differentiate him themselves from him. Because I feel like the kind of critique of them being like anthropomorphic or maybe more so on that vitalist standpoint, which maybe is still a question because I hear some people say that, yeah, you know, plainly he's a vitalist, he identifies himself as a vitalist, whereas here it's like at the beginning of the section for this week, it feels like they're kind of like on this idea about moving beyond the whole vitalist mechanist distinction. But I was just going to say that what you were saying about Fourier, Ripley, reminded me of the Reich point, where they're like pointing out something that I feel like is easy for my mind to map onto what they're saying. But then when they point it out, it makes me feel like, oh, maybe I'm missing something.
I think also in terms of desire, I think referring to how they were talking about a materialist psychiatry, right? Like they're trying to see more so the effect, like the effects of what they're calling desire, more so than saying what it is. So like desire is what we can say is machinic in humans when they are attracted to something, just like it is machinic in atoms when they are attracted to something, right? Like the substance of desire, I'm not sure, I can't remember if they've actually ever said that it was something, but more so like an empirical a phenomenon, right? That you can observe based on the relations of things and if their differences.
A long time ago when I was working on my dissertation, I tried to figure out what exactly vitalism is, at least on some, I think that, I don't know, whatever the official board of philosophers is that makes these definitions, but vitalism generally is the idea is a dualism. So there is for example, matter and there is life. There's matter and then there's the life principle. And in classical vitalism, then what happens is you don't have life, you don't have living things unless the vital principle enlivens the matter. And so it's sort of this dualism, and in Bergson you get this sense almost that you've got matter kind of falling and driving things down, and then kind of life cutting back up through it and reorganizing it. But there's another view which I think Nietzsche fits into, called hylozoism, which is similar to panpsychism in the sense that in hylozoism matter is proto-living, and so there isn't a distinct life principle, but whatever constitutes matter is fundamentally proto-living. And if you get certain organizations of this, whatever this primary stuff is, you start getting life, and you get other kinds of organizations and you don't. Similar to, you know, my understanding of panpsychism is that matter is proto-psychic. You know, like Jay says, it's not like an electron has consciousness, but that the material, that like there's a hidden variable, hidden only because we don't have access to it, at least at the present. But there's a characteristic of material bodies that is proto-conscious, and that you get certain kinds of organization of matter, and consciousness begins to emerge. And I don't know if they're working on one of those, but this sounds more, you know, the way that some of you are talking to me, it sounds like it does sound like a vitalism, which they're trying to resist, or is it more like, you know, hylozoism, where they're saying the constituents of existence are desiring machines, so that the desire is, you know, sort of built into whatever the fundamental components of reality are. Maybe that's what they're saying, but I still don't see why they want to call it libido. I mean, I just don't get that. I mean, other than the arbitrary thing, say, we're going to say any kind of attraction is libido. Okay, but why pick the word libido, which is super heavily loaded?
Well, I'm thinking of I mentioned this in the chat, but I think of the way they talk about like taking things to their auto critique, and I think that it almost feels like maybe that's like a thing for them. Like that's, you know, it's almost like this is the project of like, how do we not offer like an alternative from the outside, but bring something to its own auto critique as like honoring the very philosophy they're trying to put forth. And so I think I see them like trying to almost show like, look what capitalism and psychoanalysis has done. Like, we're going to do that to it. And, you know, I feel like it's this kind of like accelerationist idea where they want to use what is loaded, what kind of already has that libidinal investment, and then use it to break the wall, to break through.
I like that interpretation. That is very interesting. Because I don't, before I didn't really exactly know what they were saying with the whole kind of bring it to an auto critique and whatnot. You know, especially with something like Oedipus, exactly what that means, but that kind of makes sense. So I think, yeah, because the whole libido thing, it can't really be, it has to be situated in the context of a discussion of Freudianism, because that's really what they're, I think, trying to indicate is that, okay, this Freud is the person who's first saying that, yeah, all this psychic energy, whatever you want to call it, all of it is libidinous, and libido is kind of there and everything. But yeah, it only emerges into consciousness at certain times for certain things, for certain objects, and then yeah, repression is what kind of pushes it down, but it's still in operation there. And I think they're kind of working within that model, but trying to do that to kind of break that point where Freud kind of re-territorializes everything back into familial representation and all that. Instead, to see how far can we push that model where it breaks those kind of particular external images and instead gives us something kind of like more of like a free form energy. And yeah, I think that's what they're doing. But so with desire, I don't so you said they didn't explain desire, but I think that's kind of what this whole book is about, in the sense that, so you've got, the three syntheses, and you've got, what are they? They're machines. So you've got these machines that do these three syntheses, or they're kind of like, they are the syntheses, and that's basically desire. So that's what they're saying. So it's not like desire is something kind of beyond that, but this whole thing about like these syntheses and all that is exactly what they're talking about with all of this.
But if they're going to use that word, I mean, presumably they use the word desire because because they do want to call up something about what we conventionally use as that word. I mean, otherwise they would have, I guess, like created a neologism or something. So they had, I'm assuming that they have a reason for calling whatever this is desire. And then desiring machines, I noticed it's, like I said, it's hyphenated. So it's not like a machine that desires, it's desiring machines. And again, I'm still really having a hard time understanding what that means, unless again, it's some kind of hylozoism or something. And they're trying to say, they want to call whatever that implicit, like the will to power, in my view, is a kind of hylozoism, because the will to power, everything is ultimately built out of will to power, and will to power is a force that has that builds structures in certain ways. I mean, are they trying to do something similar and say that because I think of like pure difference in itself, from difference in repetition of being that kind of thing. Like pure difference in itself is similar to the will to power, but they're, I don't think it's identical, but it's similar in that it's this kind of underlying force that builds structures. And in this context, are they saying that desiring machines are like that? And if so, I don't know why they use desire. I mean, power I get because of the way Nietzsche describes how it builds structures by, things subsuming one another and so on. But anyway, is that what they mean? And why desire?
So why did Nietzsche use the word will? Because I think of will, I think of, just kind of like basic conscious, I almost like wishing something. In the same way, power, we have a very crude idea of power most of the time, where it's, I can like force my cat to take medicine if I like hold his like 6-pound body down and pry his mouth open and squirt it into his mouth. That's power, But I think what Nietzsche's doing is something, he's trying to do something, against those common ways of seeing it, and it gives it a new, so philosophy, what is it? It's a creation of concepts. It doesn't just simply take, like these ready-made ideas from common sense and then kind of like post them together. So it's just like, oh, whatever you think of will and whatever you think of power, that's got to be it. And the same thing with desire, and same thing with machines too. I think they're taking it down to like this essence, where you see that, okay, this is really what's at the core of even what I think of in this very crude way as desire. But really, what is that when you really get into it? Because I think usually when you look at, crude kind of like common sense ways that people think of anything, whether it's libido, desire, will, power, whatever it is, they're usually terribly, conceived concepts in terms of consistency and whatnot. If you look at like trying to figure out what actually makes them consistent, trying to get them to connect, I think that's really what they're doing, and what philosophy itself is kind of challenging these common sense notions and trying to get people to think of how do you think differently from these common sense notions that usually take some kind of like a given external state of affairs and traces those and then applies that on this kind of transcendental level. Instead, they want to completely reverse that and think of it another way. So I think, yeah, that's
Nietzsche, with the will to power, like Beyond Good and Evil, I think it's 16, and in the book, The Will to Power, he explicitly gives will an anthropomorphic spin. I mean, he says, if we want to understand the world from the inside, what we have to do is examine our own affects, because that's the only access we have to the world is our own being. And so if we want to understand the world from the inside, we're going to, because everything is interpretation, right? Well, the only interpretation I can give things is the interpretation from within a human perspective. And so what I do is I say, well, from within my experience, I experience will, I experience affects. And so what he says in that section is we have to do the experiment of trying to interpret the world from the inside in this way. I mean, it's kind of a Schopenhauerian kind of move, right? And so he admits that that's what he's doing, but it sounds like these two guys are saying, no, we're not doing anything anthropomorphic. We're not doing anything metaphorical. And it even sounds like they're saying there's no interpretation here, because we're telling you at the root, everything is desiring machines, not metaphor. And they don't say it's not interpretation, but it sounds like they're saying it's not even interpretation. It's like they're saying, well, no, psychoanalysis. Now they do interpretation. They do myth. But we're telling you what's at the ground state of reality. And Nietzsche does that too, but Nietzsche admits that it's an anthropomorphic experiment because that's the only kind of experiment we can do.
so Nietzsche is saying that everything has will to power, but it's anthropomorphic.
It's anthropomorphic in the sense that there is no view from nowhere. I can't crawl out of my human skin. The only world I fundamentally have access to is my world from the inside. So in a sense, that's kind of on Nietzsche's part, so almost a proto phenomenological point of view, because he's saying you have to understand the world from within this human standpoint, because that's all we've got. Where he doesn't go the way of 20th century phenomenologies, he doesn't try to do that from a psychic point of view. He does it from this, these internal forces. But he's saying, he says, I experience myself as a confluence of forces, and I experience this, and my will is this, this summation of these confluence of forces. And because that's the only world I have access to, I don't have an access to a world outside my existence. So the only kind of interpretation I can give the world is one that is grounded in my human experience, my human existence. And so I don't think Nietzsche thinks there's any sort of transhuman perspective at all possible. The only possible perspective is deeply human. And so when I say anthropomorphic, it's in the sense that the only thing that any of us have access to is human experience. And so whatever interpretation I give to the world is necessarily going to be from that. Even if I give a transcendental explanation, I'm still giving a transcendental explanation from within a human experience. So to say that the will to power is the ground of reality, ultimately, even that is an interpretation, which I think Nietzsche admits. He's saying something like, this is the most plausible, I would call it, metaphysical explanation for the ground of reality, given what I am and what I experience. And that's the only possible explanation I can give, is one grounded from within my experience. To claim otherwise is to claim to be God.
So why can't Nietzsche use the word desire? Why does it have to be will, though? Because it seems like they're talking about the same, Deleuze and Guattari, they're talking about the same thing, or similar in the sense that it's kind of like this confluence of forces that I think, yeah, it's this kind of internal energy that is difficult to describe in, you know, these kind of like extended representational terms. That's why you have to, yeah, you have to feel it internally in a sense, this kind of affective manner. But why can't that just be desire? Why is that off limits, but will is okay and power is okay? So it seems to me like they're saying the same thing, that yeah, you can get what we experience as whatever it is, desire or power, will, this, whatever this is, that is this kind of transformational energy and whatnot. So I think the same way that yeah, they're doing that, but the only thing I think where they would differ would be they definitely do not see it as a kind of human essence or anything like that. I think they make this more explicit in A Thousand Plateaus, but kind of the way to really use this to get in touch with it or whatever you want is to kind of leave your human essence behind and, you know, become something other than human, which is a way of not kind of like completely, it's not a view from nowhere. You're starting from like the tangent of like being human, but you're entering into this relation with something else where there's a zone of indiscernibility between you and this other term. So that's what they call becoming. And that, I think, is where we really get something close to a kind of like a phenomenological, you know, access to what they're talking about. But they're saying that too comes about from the same thing of desire. Desire is kind of like what's like this force that brings things into composition, like things together. Yeah.
So I guess, you know, if you say why is desire or power okay and desire not, maybe that's you know, maybe desire is just as good. I mean, you know, maybe we or they could have a dispute about which experience is a better basis for saying that. But if that's what they're saying, if they're just saying, well, I experience desire in myself, and so when I interpret the world, that's what I've got to, you know, that's what we have to work with. That seems to me like a Nietzsche move. But then, you know, again, I think Nietzsche's, you know, like Eric quoted up there are no facts, only interpretations. This too is an interpretation. And so I think, you know, Nietzsche's going to say that's an interpretation. It's one that I particularly think is particularly fruitful for these reasons. It maybe I'm wrong, but it sounds like Deleuze and Guattari are making a more, I don't know what to say, a more profound claim that this is not merely an interpretation, that this is not merely a model, but this is how things are. And I also don't think Nietzsche could say, I mean, I don't know, you know, I would have to understand the details of what you're talking about, which I don't. But, you know, my initial reaction is Nietzsche would say, you're not ever going to, I mean, you're a human. You are. You can't get out of that. But, you know, maybe you could convince me otherwise. So that one but I don't know. You know, they keep saying these things, this is not a metaphor and all this. It keeps making, maybe I'm wrong, because they're not using the word interpretation, but they seem to be making these sort of ontological claims, you know, about what things are with essentially zero qualification, where, you know, Nietzsche's very qualified. This is an interpretation. I think it's a particularly fruitful one and useful one. And I think it matches the facts of our experience better than any other interpretation I'm aware of. But it's an interpretation. I don't get that from these guys.
And I feel like, yeah, it kind of comes down to the quote about this isn't a metaphor. And I'm wondering what exactly they mean by metaphor. And Chase, you referred to some in the comments or in the chat. And yeah, I guess like, yeah, I'm like, are we kind of jumping to the interpretation talk when, like, I wonder if they would be like, oh yeah, sure. Or, you know, I think maybe they need something more particular or specific by metaphor. Chase, you said something about like external forms, and I'm wondering like how that bounces off of the interpretation conversation.
Yeah. So what I think they don't like about metaphor is that, well, it doesn't really explain a great deal, in the sense that it just refers to something else that we, that is backed up by common sense. And so it's just this continuous referral to something. So if I have some metaphor like, oh God, think of a stupid example. Come on. Let's see. Okay, I cannot think of a stupid example of a metaphor. Okay.
I mean, what you said, like the reference to common sense, like we're not referring to this just to pull from like what people already know.
Yeah, so metaphor, it's going to explain something, unfamiliar in terms of something familiar, and give you this kind of, oh, here it is. Here's a, good empirical example that everyone understands, whatever it is. I'm still trying to think of a goddamn example. What the hell? Okay. Anyways, which that's ironic, isn't it? It is. Yeah. So what they don't like about metaphor is that, yeah, it gives these kind of empirical examples taken from these very specific states of affairs usually, and then kind of applies something just to that and explains it with that, which can be just as dogmatic as anything else. But then it just kind of takes that for, okay, this is as good as we can get, but here it is explained as a metaphor, which, calls in all this kind of presuppositions about, what actually makes up that metaphor. So you're back to kind of not explaining anything again. It's still this referral, yeah, once again, to something external that is just supposed that everybody understands, which is common sense. And so in terms of the interpretation thing and what I understood, so I think
I would suggest reading Aiden's comment, and because he gives a possibility. I'm wondering what you would think about that. So I'll read it out loud. He says, I don't think they are claiming what they are doing is not an interpretation any more than what Freud did. It seems to me that they are critiquing Freud's interpretation functions as a neurotic producing machine that allows for further exploitation of the masses. What they are doing is still an interpretation insofar as the medium of language allows them to be understood. Their interpretation allows for machinic analysis of the unconscious, much like how we would diagnose a malfunctioning machine materialistically. So, I mean, if something like that is correct, if that's true, then, I mean, that would fit with my thinking of the way Nietzsche thinks about interpretation. Everything's an interpretation, but there are better and worse interpretations. And sometimes how good an interpretation is contextual depending on what you're trying to do. And what Aiden's comment seems to suggest is that they're not claiming like any kind of absolute, knowledge, but they're just saying this is a better interpretation than the psychoanalytic interpretation for the kinds of purposes we have in mind. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think that does. So I think one reason that they're doing this, that they're stressing, is that they don't want to, so interpretation is usually kind of conceived through a very cognitive, discursive, kind of, self-reflective lens. But I think they're trying to somewhat get out of that, and they're trying to get into something more where like language is about, usage or something like that. It's more of a kind of a direct force of like functions. It's like language is a machine that you can kind of insert into other machines to do things, in the same way that this book is also a machine that I can insert into other machines and they connect to language machines, but they also connect to non-linguistic machines. And so I think interpretation, it's too much kind of favoring this sort of expressive, discursive level, and instead they want to think in something more kind of direct. Although I think they do think that, yeah, this is not, there's no like absolute knowledge or any, like whether it's like Hegel or whatever. Well, definitely not like Hegel. I don't even know what the fuck Hegel even means by absolute knowledge now I think about it. Yeah, so knowledge, I would say, even as a thing, is kind of not, that's seen as something, it's like bleh, you know, knowledge. So in different repetitions, learning is more important than knowledge. So learning is this kind of living thing. Knowledge is something that, oh, I can like represent this as, you know, some proposition, you know, after the fact, and I have like these propositions, that's knowledge. So that he doesn't like that. But yeah, that's why I think interpretation is kind of calling all those things where it's always kind of something mediated by reason, something mediated by, you know, self-reflective consciousness. It's all too Hegelian.
But you don't think desiring machines are mediated in any way? I mean, the concept, the whole idea, their whole edifice of I would call it interpretation. They don't think that's some kind of immediate something.
I just wanted to reiterate, I think what Chase said about like the use versus meaning thing, which was standing out to me, and how language, I think they'll refer, and I heard listening to the Todd May lecture series on Deleuze's difference in repetition, and he's talking about like how Deleuze thinks of language and something he kind of, I think maybe he talks about this in Logic and Sense, but this was just referenced in the difference in repetition lecture series. But he talks about how like language is not something that's like just trying to correspond to the world, that's like pointing to truth, but it's something that's like interacting with the world. And I think, yeah, what Chase was saying about like language machines, and I think maybe that's what they're getting at. Like, this is not a metaphor, but like what they're saying, maybe they're making the claim that what they're saying can actually like, in like maybe this way of thinking, can actually change like how things are interacting, how things are happening, as opposed to just like, look, we figured out the meaning, like this is what it means. But instead just like by speaking, by using this language, by thinking this way, like this changes the way things play out. Maybe I'm not putting it very elegantly, but the example Todd May gave is like, in real life, we don't just walk around stating facts, stating how things are with our language. But he gives the example of like, whenever something is spoken, this has the chance that it can like almost reframe and change like the past. And it can just be like very immediate or very like on a large scale too. But the example he gave was a person walks to the front of the plane. When he gets to the front of the plane, he turns around and says something like, you know, I'm taking over this plane. And the idea being that like the uttering of that statement like changes the past 10 seconds of people witnessing what happened. And it's not that like he pointed at a truth, but that was like an intersection of like language and something happening that kind of just like all of a sudden like manifested in, I think again he refers this in Logic of Sense, but in some like sense of something happening. And I think like he referred to this as an event, but I feel like I'm trying to connect this to this idea of maybe they're just proposing that what we're saying is not just about meaning, but again, kind of pointing to this idea that we're hoping to kind of almost like create action or like, again, like revolutionize ideas, as opposed to maybe what they thought that psychoanalysis takes all of what we talk about and just turns it into like myth and, oh, that's cool, look, this is what your dream means, as opposed to like, this is what your dream can be used for.
But that to me sounds like, again, it still sounds to me like an interpretation. It's just an interpretation for a particular purpose, like you said. And, you know, I mean, I get the same sense that, you know, especially in the second part, or the, you know, the second chapter that we started this time, that the distinction seems to be like, you know, like he was saying, these machines don't have purposes and goals. They just do what they do. You know, they're machines, they do stuff. But then as soon as you start an interpretation, then you have to start talking about purposes and goals and all this stuff. But he wants to, but the machines are just, they're just doing what they're doing. And I can understand again, and I'm sorry I'm harping this, I'll try to shut up, but it still seems to me like it is a mediated interpretation, because everything's mediated. It's mediated by certain concepts. It's mediated by the way I experience the world. You know, if Chase is right, you know, they're calling, which, you know, Deleuze says stuff in Difference in Repetition that sounds like this too, that they are trying to, or he, you know, is trying to draw from from the human experience of affects and so on. If he's drawing on that stuff and saying, here's an interpretation that we think is more fruitful for these kinds of purposes than all of this myth making, that I get. It's the maybe I'm just reading it, you know, maybe I'm just reading it wrong, but they just seem to be so dogmatic, you know, and so this is the way it is. And I don't know, maybe, you know, they don't talk about that this is an interpretation and so on. So maybe I'm just asking for stuff that philosophers don't like to do. I mean, no philosophers rarely like to say anything humble, right? They're always giving you the truth.
I think
Really?
the way I understand the body without organs is kind of the way out of that, right? Because it's like, we have the body without organs. If you disagree with us, you're kind of functioning as like you know, throwing all the organization that we made with words, you know, you can do that. We can all do that, right? I mean, the job of a philosopher, I think to some degree, is saying what something is, like, right? When like I think like an axiom, right? Most philosophers have axioms that are very hard to, well, at least ought to be very hard to deny. I guess I'm particularly thinking of like Euclidean geometry, where he has like certain axioms that you kind of like, this is a given, right? Like, we have to start with this. If you deny this, then we can't get anywhere. Hegel does that too. And I think Spinoza does that too. But it's, I guess, I kind of like them for being like not that careful about it, right? But I mean, it's not that they're not being careful. I think they're being very aware, but like, you know, the concept of a body without organs, right? It's kind of fun, almost like, it's fun, and it's kind of kept me compelled to like figure out what it is, because of how bizarre it is. And I think that's part of it, right? Is like this not being able to really grasp the body without organs, because they do say that. I think at some point in 1,000 Plateaus, which I've been skimming, that it's like this thing, you don't ever really achieve it. You just keep grasping for it. And it's like when you're about, maybe you're close, it's just like, okay, first of all, I want to ask something about the body without organs. I've kind of, I feel like I understand what it is in an example, and then I forget or I disagree with myself. And that seems to be part of it, right? Like, you can think of an example, like one example they give is like when somebody is having sex, but they're like really into it, right? And like, it's more like they're not even a functioning organism anymore. They're just like this intensity, or this amalgam of drives just functioning the way they do. Or like if somebody's having a seizure, maybe I thought about that too. Like, it's a body with, like, it is a body and it does have organs literally, but like it's more of just these intensities functioning throughout the body that, you know, the individual or the subject or the organism doesn't really have control of, at least in the way that we think. But the big question was, like, I was trying to relate it to the concept of zero, because I had to look it up too. Like, historically, like, you had the concept or a concept of zero, like a positive negation in like Mesopotamia, and then like the Aztecs also had one, and the Romans actually did not actually have a concept of zero. They had null, and the Greeks didn't either. But you know, they only used numbers for like positive things that they could inscribe and keep as like records of transactions. But like the idea of zero seems to me like yeah. I also like wanted to say about like with Kant, I feel like I want to say that it might have something to do with Lumina, but I also think more so that it might have something more to do with Kant's notion of an idea, of like a concept without an object. First of all, it kind of sounds like the body without organs, right? But like the idea itself, right? Like what is the concept made of? I don't think there's like a really good answer. Or what is an idea made of? Like imagination? I don't know, but like whatever compels a person to have an idea, I guess they would call that desire. And like desiring machines that, you know, neurons in your head that come together based on the experiences that you've had, and you compile this new kind of imaginative, wondrous thing that doesn't actually exist, right? Or well, it, you know, the problem is because they say that it's a real thing, right? Like just like an idea is a real thing, but as soon as you act on that idea, it's not what it is anymore so much, right? Like an example I would give, like if you have an idea that's based mostly on intensities or affects of the world, whether they be from sensations or the way you've been conditioned in order to think, what you would do next is write down the idea. And then once you've written it, that is the object of that, like fills in the void of the objectless concept. But arguably, it's not really the same thing anymore. It's just like a representation of it.
Would
And
you,
I wanted to see if that has something to do. Yeah.
would you repeat that again, that last thing you said about the object and the idea?
Yeah. So the way I understand Kant is like his notion of the idea was a concept without an object, right? So like the concept itself, you could say, is like made up of other empirical data that you've collected over time. Like I don't know, a chair that's made out of people, right? Like maybe there's something that like really exists out there like that, but like not the way that I'm thinking about it. Like the idea I have is personalized to my weird head that comes up with something like that. And then like if I'm like, maybe I want to make a chair out of people, right? So I go and hack up some people and then build a chair out of it. It's like, okay, this is like, you know, it's not the same as the idea that I had, right? Because the idea was in my head, but I acted on that idea and I put labor into making this actual object that the idea was lacking. Also with lack, right? I'll come back to that maybe later. But like, you know, I didn't have to do that. I just, this is the product of my idea, right? It's the object that I constructed based on the lack of the object existing of the idea that I've had. So, and like the body without organs, right? Like the body without organs, I guess I'm trying to compare to the concept without an object. And once I actually try to, you know, okay, I've constructed a body without organs. That's not it, right? It's no longer that, because it just by definition isn't, right? Like the idea versus the actual object.
Yeah, so I think so what is philosophy, the book that Deleuze and Guattari wrote? So it's all about, you know, what is philosophy? Their definition of philosophy is it's concept creation, constructivism. And you know what are concepts? Concepts are kind of, they're new ways of thinking. They're, once again, you know, kind of like machines that, you know, enter thought, but then thought is capable of connecting with everything in a way. So I think, yeah, it's kind of, once again, kind of like what Joey was talking about, as, you know, these things can be put into use to do all these other things. And that's really where they're coming from. And I think, you know, whether it's whatever concepts or ideas or, you know, you can have abstractions of all kind that still have some kind of effect and can be put to some kind of use in some way. I think that's kind of this, that's the sort of gestalt shift that they're trying to kind of engender in us. There's a lot I was going to say, but I kind of just forgot. But yeah.
So let me ask.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. I will have to go shortly. I've made another nerd commitment. I apologize. About 8:30. But regards to, for anybody's interested, we're doing a raid. Haha, fun. So in regards to the metaphor use, I think it's interesting that was fascinating to me. Because, like, for example, if I were to say, like, the earth is flat as a pancake, you know, metaphor, everybody understands the concept or the theory associated with that, and we're good to go. But if I were to say the earth is as flat as the color red, well, things start becoming a little fuzzy. And then when people ask me, well, what do I mean by red? I can give you an empirical verification of what red is. It's only when we start asking what the use of that phrase is that it starts making sense, if it makes sense at all, which is what I was leaning towards in their interpretation of metaphors. Particularly, yes, as you said, Chase, the gestalt kind of like shift when it comes to the application or use of certain things and how we describe them. And then when it gets to the axiomatic, it gets really kind of complex when we start trying to take individual rules and apply them to how things work when it comes to language, because it's like akin to saying, look at your watch and tell me what time it is, and then tell me exact moment when you calculated the time. You know, when was that? So it gets real fuzzy, and it leans more towards relativistic introspection in that regards. And then the more precise you try to make the axiomatic rules of what it is for when we calculate, well, then it starts becoming a little more undefined. So that's how I interpreted their, you know, metaphor interpretation. And did anybody else in this chapter get a lot of aspects of like Hegel and Nietzsche combined when it comes to talking about desire? Because it seems like they're saying desire is like subconscious, and then when it comes to the social machines, that's the object of desire. So in my interpretation of this, I was kind of reading it from a Hegelian aspect of where desire is on like consciousness level, that's like consuming and wanting to draw things into itself, and then self-consciousness is something it's kind of dependent upon, but on the social level, the social machines are like the akin to self-consciousness. Is that, you know, a valid interpretation?
So anything to do with Hegel, D and G are just really like, no. So, and especially anything to do with Hegel and consciousness and self-consciousness, that's a no-go.
Good time for my question. What the hell is auto-critique then? Who or what is engaging in self-criticism if they don't have self-consciousness?
You were holding on to that for a while. I was waiting for Eric to speak. I was like, I want to know.
Yeah, so they give this kind of, they say that desire itself is a kind of subject, don't they? It's kind of like this subject that of its own reproduction or something. I can't remember what the phrase they use.
Desire now an entity unto itself that can think of itself as a self-conscious subject?
Why not?
Why is like self needed, I guess? How do we, from auto critique to self-consciousness stuff, why do we need consciousness?
For criticism? For self-criticism? Yeah, I can't think of critique without reason, without the use of reason. maybe I'm just spent too much time with Germans, but I can't think how you would critique something without employing reason. Especially if it's self-criticism, I think I need a self-conscious, rational, or, the self-conscious use of reason in order to get auto-critique.
Yeah.
I guess I wasn't making that link. I guess when I was reading critique, and maybe this is just wrong, but I was just reading it as like something that kind of just defeats itself, and just kind of like pushes itself into something else, which I feel like at least that made sense to me of how they speak of it. But
that to me doesn't rise to the level of critique. I can imagine things that, like eat themselves up as they develop, or undo themselves, build themselves and unfold themselves in their life, but I still don't see criticism. And maybe I'm just, again, spent too much time with Germans that I have this notion of critique that, like, it involves rationality and self-consciousness. So, but yeah.
I mean, I'm wondering, how do they speak of that third synthesis? Because the third synthesis is where we get the selves, the conjunction. And I'm wondering, if that has anything to do with it, if we're running with the critique and the rationality.
Yeah, I think that third synthesis does have kind of a critique effect in terms of the subject to a certain degree. The thing about desire being the subject, or really, okay, I think it's really kind of like desiring production. That's kind of like the substance, like in a Spinoza sense. And that's really where they're saying that that's kind of the subject of all these things. But the way that, because it's kind of this self-differentiating thing in its production, it can kind of change itself. And that's where the auto-critique is. So it'd be like desire creates more desire in order to critique the other desire. So you got like Oedipal desire, whatever, just like sitting over here. You just create more desire that doesn't have this form. And then that is what would be the critique of that other form. That's explained very crudely, but I think something like that could be there. But Eric, what you're saying about reason, that reminds me of, so in Deleuze's book on Nietzsche, he says that it's really Nietzsche who kind of completes, I don't know if he says complete, but he really takes critique kind of further. So he says, Kant was great for having kind of invented critique as we know it, but he betrayed it almost immediately because he doesn't actually critique reason. He assumes reason from the very beginning. And the fact that he doesn't think of the genetic principle of what reason is, he just takes it as a given. That is, or it really takes the aims of reason as the given. And that is what he thinks Nietzsche was innovative for, being able to see what actually was the genetic principle of reason in terms of, I believe, values and forces, I think, something like that. Or there's also interpretation involved in it too. It's like values, I can't remember what it was, but the way that he could conceive of how reason was actually generated, that is what the critique of it would involve, is being able to understand how it actually came about, its differential element, instead of he kind of almost like mocks Kant by saying that, it's a tribunal of reason, in the tribunal of reason. It's like the fox guarding the hen house at that point. There's no real, it's either a disaster, or you can see it as this is a mock trial because it was set up in reason's favor from the very beginning. And instead we have to really critique, to really get the critique going, we have to be able to even critique what we're using in the critique. And to do that is to really think of how it's actually produced, how it's generated. Yeah.
For what it's worth, I would defend Kant to say like he dealt a major blow to the idea of reason as, you know, capable of attaining knowledge of transcendent objects. And so the conception of reason before Kant and then did not survive Kant, right? So I would suggest that Nietzsche kind of picks up where Kant left off, and is kind of operating by standing on his shoulders, but then maybe doesn't hesitate to accidentally, no, not accidentally, to let out a fart in his face or something, you know, like, you know, even when Neville was describing, you know, Nietzsche earlier, you know, I can only access things through a human perspective. There's no outside this perspective. I don't know things as they are apart from, you know, how they appear to me from, I think in many ways, Nietzsche critiques Kant and his critiques of Kant are good, but they're predicated on taking a lot of Kant on board, right? And then the critiques are things that can only, in a certain way, only be thought of like after Kant's been, you know, now an established figure, you know, and you push towards another generation of the same kind of trajectory. From this position, we can then move forward to critique it. But had we not, you know, had Kant to get here, we wouldn't have a Nietzsche to turn around and say, well, that critique of reason wasn't thoroughgoing enough, right? Which I can appreciate as well, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think does sound like, at least definitely the way Deleuze presents him, is that he's continuing what Kant is doing. He's saying he's continuing critique. It's similar to kind of how they talk about Freud too, in the sense of, you know, Freud did something pretty amazing. He really changed things, but at the same time, he also did betray kind of his own, there's this potential that he did not really fulfill. You know, he, you know, created the potential. And that's where I think the kind of like critique of that would come about. It'd be, okay, let's take this person's like original, you know, potential of their idea and really maximize it and push it against this other formation that they came up with. So I think that's similar to what there's, yeah, because I think that is definitely true in terms of, so Kant, you know, I think especially the critique of pure reason, that was definitely revolutionary. The way that it's, you know, arguing against all this kind of like theological reasoning and whatnot. And I think that was very much, so I think Nietzsche is definitely drawing directly on Kant. So my thesis advisor doesn't think that. He thinks that he only read Schopenhauer, although I think he's just joking, I don't know. But
Schopenhauer is very much copying Kant and then
yes,
small
yeah,
adjustments, you know.
Yeah, because I think that's what he also gets from Schopenhauer too, is you take part of Kant, but then there's other parts where he definitely critiques Kant. So I think especially with the Kantian morality ethics, so Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Deleuze, basically all of them will agree that this is where kind of like Kant really went wrong. So Schopenhauer is kind of complex, sort of, but I think he's doing the same. So he believes that, okay, this distinction between practical reason and pure reason, that I think is in the way that, okay, you know, we banished all these things from speculative reason, you know, where we can't have reason, you know, give us knowledge of God and all this cool stuff. But we have to believe in it morally, because of the moral law and all this stupid shit. So that's where Deleuze says that, yeah, this is where Kant went wrong. And this is also kind of the trajectory against that is where Nietzsche really does his work in terms of going against this kind of like a betrayal of the critical project by putting it just back into conventional morality, which is always going to serve established powers. It's going to be a tracing of the established powers and just simply reaffirm actuality as it is. But really, critique is always something that moves in a kind of tangent or is a derivative from actuality. Yes, we have to think in an untimely manner. So this actuality is always going to be kind of constrained by whatever these structures of sovereignty in the world. So instead, we need to think more. There's a lot more revolutionary potential, critical potential, and potentiality in the future. And I think that's why. So some of this is what Deleuze is getting from Nietzsche in terms of talking about the untimely and whatnot. And I think he's something like that also going on here too, in the sense of that's kind of what their pragmatism, this kind of like schizoanalytic perspective is thinking in terms of. It's of like, how can we bring these conditions of the new into actuality, you know, from the future, so to speak. And yeah, the way that I think it's just really important to think that you never kind of like settle on established powers or assumed facts of kind of conventional common sense. It's always going to be something that's differential from that, whether it's to create it or critique it or anything.
That reminds me of Horkheimer's essay, the distinction between traditional and critical theory, which is, I mean, traditional theory is describing the world as it actually is, and critical theory has to step outside the actual in order to bring critique, in order to, you know, spark some change for something better.
That's kind of how I understand the body without organs still. Like I keep coming back to that. So would you say what Nietzsche did in terms of his critique of Kant was part of the schizophrenic process? At least in the Deleuzian sense?
Yeah. So yeah, the schizophrenic process, it's kind of so that's this kind of like absolute deterritorialization, which that just reminds me, there's like a huge thing on Discord. I'm in this private chat, and there's a huge discussion about absolute deterritorialization that I just like totally ignored because it was like 50 messages. I just realized I had to deal with that. But that's kind of what this, you know, it's going beyond those kind of, so capitalism, you know, it's this kind of relative deterritorialization in the sense that, so it actually gets really complex. I've spent the entire week reading about this almost nonstop because I've been writing this article. Anyways, nobody cares about that, but it's so complex. It's like absolute relative thing. It's really not, it's not consistent basically. They didn't really, or it's so confusing. But anyways, capitalism is this thing where it'll deterritorialize, but only insofar its goal is to like immediately reterritorialize those things through the state. And the state is what kind of makes that concrete in terms of keeping it from going past its limits. So it's that relative limit. But then, yeah, that limit beyond that, the exterior limit, that is what the schizophrenic process is always kind of aiming at. But then once again, yeah, like the body without organs, it's not something that is ever this state of affairs. It's not like a fact I can point at and be like, oh, look, there it is, fucking body without organs, you know? Instead, it's kind of this fuzzy aggregate that, you know, this, or temporally, it's a process. It's something differential. It's something genetic. So, yeah. So I think one way to actually think of this is, so I've been thinking about this especially. Okay, so there's this book that was written by, I think his name is, I can't remember his first name, but I think it's Hallward or something like that. He wrote this book critiquing Deleuze called Out of This World. And his argument is that he's almost kind of like a mystic kind of, or like thinking in terms of like escape from the world, almost like a Gnostic kind of character. So it's basically, it's like a lot of it is just like really bad interpretation, but some of it I think is actually a decent way to actually think about what Deleuze is doing that is unique, in the sense of how this, you know, especially this idea of like a kind of like a virtual that is not actual but it's real, or the way to think of how is something, can something be abstract but yet totally real, completely real. And I think that's definitely a difficult thought to think, but I think that difficulty of thinking it, possibly the impossibility of thinking it, that's part of the kind of total experience of what Deleuze is. And it's supposed to, if it doesn't challenge your thinking, then it's not philosophy. It's just bullshit at that point. You know, philosophy should harm people. It should harm stupidity most of all. Yeah, transcendental empiricism, which, yeah, I think that's kind of the thing, like, you know, taking things like towards their limit. It's so for intensity, it would be, that's the bite of that organ. It's like trying to reach this like intensive limit where everything, so the way I think of it, okay, well, this goes into like the idea of the plane of consistency or the plane of immanence. But I'll try to avoid that for now and just say, yeah, I think the way that they think of it in transcendental empiricism, that's kind of helpful in the sense that, okay, so one way you can think of that is Deleuze talks about this transcendental kind of exercise of the faculties. So this would be kind of taking a faculty to its like absolute limit, to where it attains an object that only it as a faculty can understand, or not understand, grasp more so. But at the same time, that thing is also this kind of impossibility from a kind of exclusive disjunction way of thinking of it. So it would be kind of the faculty of thinking is kind of totally brought to its limit in thinking the unthinkable, or sensation is brought to its limit in sensing what is insensible. And you keep going, you know, perception, what is imperceptible, and that kind of like meeting point where these meet each other and blend together in this zone of indiscernibility. That is kind of like this peak, this limit that we're always trying to like get to, and is also kind of the core of like a sort of Deleuzian ethics as well. Of, you know, that's what it's about, is how can I like ride this plateau of intensity? How can I compose, you know, my own existence as a body without organs, as a plateau? How can I have this plane of consistency and keep this going? You know, it's, so it would be not something like a radical, I'm gonna go get myself killed and be like, yeah, deterritorialization, and then like get hit by a car or something. Which, that would be absolute deterritorialization, you know, but that's also a line of abolition and death and whatnot, which is, there's a lot of, so this is the thing of Anti-Oedipus, there's a kind of like a sort of like a relatively a reckless kind of tone to it, where 1,000 Plateaus is much more, has a cautious kind of tone to it, but in a way that I think makes a little more sense. Because yeah, I think it actually kind of goes back to, I'm sort of ranting at this point. Oh, well, whatever, fuck it. That's what y'all signed up for, right? Hear my stupid rants. So yeah, so transcendental illusions, that's that one, so Kant had this about reason. I think that's one of Deleuze's favorite things he gets from Kant is this idea that something can have almost like a problem, but like its own negative kind of like wrapped up into it. So this transcendental illusion of reason, but I think they're thinking of that in terms of this whole deterritorialization, desire, all these things, they all have these kind of transcendental illusions within them. And we need to think in terms of that too and take those things into consideration. And yeah, I think they do a better job of that in 1,000 Plateaus, but it definitely helps to think of, it helps to think of it in terms of a practical ethics. That has to be qualified because it's the opposite of a kind of dogmatic morality. And it's not saying, what is, because that's almost like it's basically kind of a nonsense kind of thing. So in 1,000 Plateaus, they say that it's really, there's a kind of being to be it. It's really, that itself is a dogmatic thing. And instead, let's think of things in terms of conjunctions of and, because none of these concepts that we're creating, these philosophical concepts, are exhausting anything. It's not like they say like everything is desire and then that's it, final full stop, that's it. Nothing is ever full stop. It's a process ontology. It's constantly in interaction and multiplicity. We can never kind of like go down to like an atom and just like be like, oh, well, there it is, Instead, those atoms just kind of like explode into waves and particles and non-local interactions and zones of indiscernibility and becomings. And then, where do we go from there? So I think they think, okay, the idea is to kind of like try to aim for that plane of consistency, that like total space where everything connects, but as a concept, you're trying to aim towards it always as a limit. You never get there. You never get to the plane of consistency, except Spinoza. Spinoza's the one exception because he's the Christ of philosophers who showed that it was possible. Okay, but aside from Spinoza, everyone else, we're always going to be trying to get to that plane of consistency where all the differences come together, all process, enters. That is that point, that it's like that felt intensity. That's what we're trying to get to. But we're never just like, okay, we did it, like, oh, I wrote the book, here we go, publish it. So nothing is ever totally complete. It's a lifestyle, Yeah. Aesthetic paradigm, or ethico-aesthetic paradigm, as Guattari says. So, Nev, in terms of praying to Lord Spinoza, amen.
We need statues of Spinoza crying blood and stuff like that.
Definitely.
Miracles.
Can we just be a Spinoza cult already? Like, I'm down.
By the way, I was talking to Yvonne. Do you remember I don't know if it's Ivan or Yvonne Marquez at Texas State? Chase, I don't know if you remember him, but
yeah.
Short guy.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I definitely remember him. Yeah.
So Hunter has a class with him this semester, and Hunter was telling him about that we were reading this book, and so Marquez came in to talk to me. He's, by the way, the one that beat me up for saying that Kant has a metaphysics. But anyway, but he he said that I mentioned something about the body without organs. I said, we've pretty much, me and a few, people, some, not you apparently, but have sort of given up on understanding what that is. And his response is, well, he says, in order to understand the body without organs, you really need to understand Spinoza. Which I thought, and I told him, well, there's this guy Chase, and he says Spinoza's all over this book, and he goes, yep. He said he's not there. They don't name check him very often, but he's always there behind the scenes.
Yeah, so later in the book, they say that the body without organs is substance in the most Spinozist sense of the term. I think that's the quote. So, yeah. But they changed that a little bit in A Thousand Plateaus, because at that point, substance is kind of multiple, which is kind of confusing, I think, here in Anti-Oedipus, because it seems to be they're implying, well, I think they do say this, I have to go back and look at it, that there is kind of like a plane of all the body without organs where they all kind of conjoin into some kind of meta body without organs, and that's kind of like the substance. But so Deleuze, he does some interesting things with Spinoza that is not, he has a unique interpretation of Spinoza in terms of so Spinoza's ethics are they're definitely in a zone of indiscernibility with his interpretation of Nietzsche. And the same thing, Spinoza, also his kind of whole ontology is really turned into a kind of becoming kind of thing. There's definitely, it was a lot of people, they have interpreted, very conscious that I'm using the term interpret, but anyways, they've seen Spinoza in a very kind of static manner, where Deleuze, he interprets Spinoza to be much more dynamic, but also there's an aspect where he's kind of notably doing something different than Spinoza, and saying that instead of substance being the engine of everything, instead it needs to turn around the modes. So almost turn it into a kind of what is it, nominalism, a kind of hyper nominalism of the modes as the engine of production, or expression, whatever you want to call it in Spinoza. So instead of substance being this one big thing, and then it whatever expresses itself in thought and extension and these modes or whatever, instead it's modes in their difference. That is really the engine of all these things. It's pretty interesting. But now that it gives a really good lens into thinking of the way that a lot of this other stuff is going, in the same way that having a somewhat of an understanding of Nietzsche will give you a kind of way in, and also Bergson, of course, too, but even Kant, to a certain degree. But I think that's kind of this sort of, so what he's trying to do with his philosophy, Deleuze in general, I think, is to kind of create these zones of indiscernibility with these other thinkers. And that's why it can seem if you look hard enough, it seems Nietzsche is in everything. Or if you look hard enough, it seems like Bergson is almost in everything, or Spinoza is almost in everything. And the way that, but then it's not really Spinoza, it's very different from, just reading the ethics. The same way his Nietzsche is a different Nietzsche, and he's doing something different from Nietzsche too. So I think that goes with also the kind of thing that he's doing, where you try to reach, you create your plane of immanence, you try to reach the limit, but it never actually grasps this totalized whole. Instead, the total, or the whole, is kind of apart amongst the other parts. It's exterior to it. So that's where you can go everything you can get a grasp of it and say like, oh yeah, so this is it, it's desire or whatever. But even that is kind of like, that's one whole that's just next to the other parts. That's another and, but you can also have another and another and another and. In the same way that you can have, oh yes, this philosophical project that is, Deleuzian, but also it's Guattarian, but it also, it's Marx, Spinoza, Lacan, everything is in it. But then you can still, all these ways are just kind of like ways into it, into like a functioning thing, but they're all these machines that we can plug into other machines. The point is simply to get the machines working, take the machines and then apply them to your own desire. And yeah, that's basically Deleuzian ethics for you.
So what, I feel like I feel probably stupid for asking this because you probably explained it, but what's a zone of indiscernibility?
So that's where, so I think you can kind of see this in, they talk about this in terms of the molecular. They extend it beyond kind of, like literal physical states of, like the molecular or whatnot. But okay, so I was talking to my,
I want to give an example. Like, I guess I made that reference to page 293 earlier, and I'm wondering if that applies to this. But the idea where they're talking about like objects of desire just being these like field of intercepted and received forces. And I'm imagining like this almost zone of indiscernibility when like I might think of my partner as just like an intersection of all these different things that I like am attracted to in the world. And how like at times, there's just, it calls into question just like, wait, what am I really attracted to? And it's just like, oh wait, like, what is she, I don't want to use the word represent, but like, why am I attracted to that? And even, it's like, and in reading this book, I mean, I am very entertained at the idea of seeing like what kind of doors did my partner like open up for me. And I feel like it, almost takes some magic away from this idea of feeling attracted to someone, but like it feels just interesting to see that, how like when I look at an object and like almost put this little Deleuzian frame on, and looking at it almost as this like, I feel like that same kind of Nietzschean thing applies, where it's like, how is that just this, like, how is my partner different from, the person that was there to like push me to make the next step in my life, and that I like saw that and I was attracted to that. Like, it's just this blurriness, I guess.
So how does the zone of indiscernibility fit into that?
I'm seeing how like an object of our desire, so like a sexual object, becomes indiscernible from anything else. Comes to indiscernible anything that I might be like professionally attracted to, say, or socially attracted to. Like I think of a fetish where like, what's the difference between the shoe and, a person? My sexuality should be stuck on having kids, right? But just where that becomes called into question. And I see that, when Chase said like turning themselves or their book into a zone of indiscernibility, how like, oh, I want to read Deleuze. But this idea of just like, wait, like, who am I reading? Am I reading Bergson? Am I reading Spinoza? Am I reading Nietzsche? This is Hegel. And it's just like, wait, who is this? Who's speaking? I guess I'm thinking too of an Anti-Oedipus. I don't know if the whole book's like this. I've read like little snippets, but they have that chapter very early on. I think it's like on linguistics, where they're like framing it as almost like a theater, like a play or something. And like all the linguistic people are like talking back and forth, but you have no clue who's talking. And it's like just this mess of like and I feel like, it's almost like that's how they write, where they're like, who are they speaking out of that you don't necessarily recognize? But maybe I have a kind of attraction to Spinoza, or maybe I'm aversive to Spinoza, but they don't mention him. And then at the end of the book, I'm like, whoa, like that was great. And then it's just like, surprise, I'm just a wasp.
Yeah. So that plateau, it's called the geology of morals, and it's insane. I was reading it this week, and it made the most sense I've ever had it made. So just before I had to give up on that plateau, but that's probably the most like, it's the most detailed, but it's also probably the best in terms of the most like concrete, I guess, way of thinking of like what they're doing, where they really lay out everything. It's in that plateau, not all of it, but once again, yeah, it's kind of that thing of trying to grasp the whole, but just getting this kind of like part of it. But okay, so yeah, the zone of indiscernibility. Well, first, okay, Joey, that idea you're talking about with, you know, sexual object, whatnot, that sounds a lot like the idea of the virtual object of desire and difference of repetition. Is, you know, like these series that, so it's about partial objects, but that's kind of how it operates. So what the idea is that there's like a synthesis of time that is also, I'm not sure if he says libido or erotic or something. It has to do with sexuality though. And it's this idea that it's like a synthesis, but what it kind of connects a kind of psyche to is it'll be a series, and this series kind of operates by like switching between different partial objects of actual objects. So, but always in a way that it will never take something that actually was just like it was for the actual. It just takes these, it just extracts these aspects in order to simply keep the synthesis going. So operating this series of like, oh, I see like there's some kind of sense of, I don't know, something I'm attracted to, and I get it in this book, whatever. I've got Kant's Critique of Pure Reason in front of me. Oh, I want to read this. There's something just like bringing me to it. And, you know, where does that separate itself out from the way that I want to do something else or anything else? He's saying that like there's these aspects that overlap, and that we go in this way of like jumping from these different partial objects, these different aspects, but they're never actually these complete things that we can just reduce to like one state of affairs or another. But people operate as these kind of like these indices, like an index for what is really about this virtual series, is something that introduces all of time in it. But okay, yeah, the zone of indiscernibility though, what that is about is I think if you think about it in terms of molecules and like quantum physics, it's something kind of like that, where, okay, you know, like Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, you can't measure both, have like complete precision with both direction and position, I believe, or something like that. So if you have some kind of, you got an atom, you got something, you can never really know either its position and then like what its direction is, where it's actually going, or you can know the direction, but you can't know the actual position. Because at that point, it's just like a wave. And the way that you can have these things kind of interspersing with each other at the same time too, where you can't actually tell like where one ends, where the other one begins, that's really kind of the heart of the concept. And that's what a becoming is. A becoming is something where you have this kind of overlap of one thing with another, where it kind of loses itself in that other thing, but it does that by creating a third thing that's new, and it acts back on those other two and transforms those. So this would be like if I combine Spinoza and Nietzsche into some philosophy, I'm in some sense getting, I'm taking some aspect of Nietzsche, taking some aspect of Spinoza, and I'm putting them into a way that where they overlap, in which I can no longer discern exactly where one ends, where one begins, in a way that transforms, brings out something unique in Spinoza that was not there before, and something unique also in Nietzsche that was not there before, and at the same time creates this third thing, a block of becoming that is no. So they're definitely nice. Yeah. Which again, too Hegelian, nothing. Yeah, So in difference repetition, though, he's down with the dialectic. He just says, it's not Hegelian dialectic. That's stupid dialectic. Yeah, but yeah, it's pretty fun. Becomings, the zone of indiscernibility, which applies to molecules as well. Okay, so this is the thing that my chemist friend told me. So actually, I got her to read some 2 pages of 1,000 Plateaus. And it was like, explain what this means, it's stuff about molecules and non-covalent bonds. And she said that it was all accurate, but that they explained it. They could have explained it way easier and in simpler terms. And why the fuck are they talking like that? But the chemistry apparently was accurate. But the idea is, and the way she explained it is that, okay, the model of a molecule that people have, it's like the molecules, you got these blocks and all this stuff. It's supposed to be oh, that's supposed to be, the molecule. But instead it's kind of like a model of an atom where, you have these balls, around a nucleus, but really the electrons, but really those electrons are not like a ball. They're not these, they don't have discernible, totally localizable contours and whatnot, where you can distinguish, there it is right there. There it is, that one. She's saying that molecules are the same way. It's just, you make the model based off of just probabilistic statistical accumulation. So basically, just enough times, the most probable thing is that it would be around this location. So then they just make a representation of a ball around the place where it's most likely to be. But it's something that is constantly in motion. It's becoming. So there's not really, that model is at the same time kind of inaccurate in terms of what molecules are actually like. But the thing is, we can't actually ever see a molecule, because a molecule is below the wavelength of light. So you literally cannot see a molecule. It's impossible. You can't. You can discern its effects, but no. Which is an interesting thing to think about, that there's this whole kind of layer to us that cannot be taken up into vision. I think there's something interesting about that. It kind of, is, if Bergson's right, this kind of spatialized way of thinking of oh, one thing is here and it ends right there along its contours, and these are just parts exterior to other parts, kind of Newtonian physics kind of stuff. Very good for understanding this kind of molar world of big blocks and whatnot, but it won't help you discern why your girlfriend dumped you or whatnot. It doesn't work very well for that. Or for just about anything other than probably those building blocks of things. Oh, but yeah, that's what it's all about. You just heard the entire truth right here, right now from me. Everyone else is wrong that disagrees with me. The universe is libido, desire, becoming, zones of indiscernibility, molecular desiring machines. And that's all you need to know for everything in life ever. There you go.
We know the answer. We got it. We just gotta actualize it.
Oh, one more thing.
I've been waiting for this all my life.
Fuck
Go
the
ahead.
queen.
Yeah, my English teacher announced she was dead, and I was like, almost cheered, and then it was like, oh wait, I should probably not cheer in front of everyone, but you know, it's like,
Yeah.
yeah. It's like,
Personally, I think you should cheer. I like cheering.
Yeah,
I mean,
like,
you don't
really
have to cheer.
weird,
You don't have to, but
but then the moment had passed, you know. So.
yeah, I don't know. So I've heard some things like from the TV in the other room. Sometimes it kind of filters in, and I hear some stuff, and I'm just like, but yeah, like celebrating her service to the people and all this stuff. I'm just like,
Worst
oh
one
God.
I've seen was a Queer Tea article about how she was a quiet supporter of gay rights, which is, yeah, very quiet.
Very quiet, I'm guessing. Yeah.
I was tempted
Until
to.
it's already probably something that was like accepted enough for her to have that position. Then what she was then just like a slightly less quiet supporter. Yeah.
Literally the related article at the bottom, it links to a different one about how she had told who's the wife who's had the controversy for being black, Meghan Merkel.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, but so she said she had told her she couldn't treat an AIDS patient. It's like that was literally the article. It redirects from the article about how she's, and like the other stuff is stuff like in their own thing. It's like, yes, supposedly she had said she was really happy when she signed this ceremonial thing about, because she doesn't have power, but it's like, and like in the own thing it says, yeah, this was just a rumor and it was never substantiated, you know, like.
It's very strange that the British still have this thing and seem to like it. Like it seems to be like kind of a popular thing. You know, there's plenty of that don't.
Who are you talking to, Chase? Like seriously, like I find more Americans are upset by the Queen's passing than the British people.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, I don't deny that. Yeah,
and
but
I also lived in Scotland where she's generally reviled, except among the upper class.
Okay, yeah. So one thing that's interesting about Scotland is that they voted to stay in, you know, the United Kingdom, which seems kind of strange to me. But honestly, I don't know anything about like Scottish politics, so who the fuck knows? I don't. But yeah, it's okay. I just find it strange that there's this kind of such an obvious archaism of another time that's kind of like this worthless representational image of something that I'm guessing I don't know why they would be proud of it.
The monarchy?
Yeah.
National identity.
Yeah.
But it's like
a lot of British
bad identity.
Just to own the French, maybe. Just to be different from the French.
I think, yeah, Joey's making a point. Some British people are proud of the monarchy, and it's because that's the figure who dots the I and crosses the T. You know, in the very very much in the same Hegelian sense. Like, you know, we want a constitutional monarchy, but you know the laws are made by the people, but you want an official figure to kind of like certify and put their stamp on everything. So there are some British people who love the Queen for that reason, or they love the Queen because of her history after World War II, helping rally the nation to rebuild itself. But most of the British people I know, and especially Scottish people, really don't like the monarchy at all as an institution. But again, it's the upper class.
Makes sense. Yes, I don't think I got that far in phenomenology of spirit. I would totally understand with absolute knowledge, but yeah. So I think it's almost more interesting to think that, you know, a lot of people, first of all, it's not like a thing they're voting on. It's not like people are like constantly like debating this, or that I think the way that it is presented is, like this is just a ceremonial position. That's kind of the thing. It's like, okay, let's take it, so people don't even think to like, it's just something that's accepted. I don't know, but it seems like a strange thing to accept from my perspective. But at the same time, it's just like, well, why do there's tons of shit in my own society that like, why is this accepted? That's a mystery to me, but yeah.
I mean, I think we're all in agreement. It's an archaic institution, and even with
Yeah.
argument that I don't think this argument is all convincing, but there's I wouldn't say like a bit of merit to it. A lot of the British people that I would argue with, even they would say like, no, I'd be quite happy to get rid of the monarchy, but at least for now we have this advantage. In your country, your head of state is a president, and your president is partisan, and a buffoon makes an ass of himself, and then 4 years later you have a new head of state, and it could be another buffoon who makes an ass of himself, and just over and over again. At least we have somebody we know has some decorum, like that said, like her husband, I mean, the queen was pretty good at like, waving and not saying too much. You know what I mean? Don't say too many.
Was good at that, yeah.
But her husband,
God rest her soul, yeah.
her husband was a hoot, because he'd do the ceremonial thing, and then just like racism, sexism, boom, 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 boom. Like he went to Australia, and there were some Aboriginal. They did a dance for him,
Oh no.
and then like immediately he's like, "Do you guys still chuck spears at each other?" Like, it was an embarrassment to British people, but as an American, I remember laughing at that whole episode.
I think I remember Hunter sharing an article about it's something like the 10 most embarrassing things that Prince, whatever the fuck his name is, has done. And it was both like hilarious, but also just like, oh my God, like, no. It's
so
like,
bad.
yeah.
It just shows you how out of touch those super rich.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll just reiterate. In my experience, more Americans love the monarchy than British people.
Yeah, it's the royal family's all in like the entertainment television stuff. It's like a celebrity thing.
Yeah, it's celebrities, and we don't have to pay taxes for them, so just celebrities to Americans. But
yeah,
British people actually have to live with them. Well, not with them, but near them.
Yeah.
I'd bring that up too. Your taxes are paying for their lifestyle, and a few of them would come back. They actually generate more money than what we pay in taxes in terms of tourism revenue and all that other stuff.
I mean, technically, but most of the tourism is people going to places they live in, so it doesn't necessarily mean it comes from them. Like people also visit French castles, and there are no monarchy there.
Yeah, that seems like a quasi-cause kind of anti-production thing kind of going on there.
Yeah.
Also,
like we're generating income by being a tourist attraction. Therefore, I mean, I'm not saying, Eric, that you're like justifying the monarchy or whatever. Yeah.
No, it's a pretty lame argument after everything, right? After the grandeur of dynasty, through the centuries. Now it's like, no, come on, guys. We generate income. Like tourists love to take their photo with us.
Wow, that would be like the most surreal neoliberalism ever. It would just like we just have like neo-monarchies based off of just like economic calculations that say that they're generating like tourist income. So we all go to like other countries to see the neo-monarchies of the other countries, and they come to see ours, and we're generating surplus value doing this.
Like making like an alternative, like we find some relative of like George Washington, we're like, okay, what if we imagine he had become king, so now you're an alternative monarch. It's just ceremonial, but we want tourism.
Yeah, and then we can understand that his body was actually the quasi-cause of production the whole time, and we just weren't aware of it. So that's it. The body of the despot right there. Interesting. George Washington.
Well, I
But
was
it was
saying, if
Thomas
you're-
Jefferson who I think would be, that's Thomas Jefferson would be the one with the black descendant, right? Yeah.
yeah, so if we're going to elevate someone to king, it should be a black descendant of Thomas
I
Jefferson.
I kind of like that idea. Yeah.
That would, well, apparently, there was someone that posted that, is it in Texas? There's that schools are starting to post "In God We Trust." I can't remember if that, and then someone posted it in Arabic.
Oh, nice. I read somewhere
But they took it down. They took the Arabic
Yeah.
one down.
They're also sending ones with like pride flags on them, but they would take those down. Though legally they're not supposed to, because legally they said you had to keep them up, but
But
Wait, what is
Texas.
this on?
there's some law that was like if it was like before public schools couldn't have like stuff like "In God We Trust" even if they were donated, but then the law was like if they're donated you have to keep them up. And then people sent in ones in like in Arabic or pride flags, and then they still took them down. I don't really understand it, the whole thing, but
Yeah, I don't either. Yeah.
Typical Texas.
Yeah, it's all fucked. That's my